What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? As I try to get it out. I hope y'all are doing all right tonight. We got Dr. Josh stopping by. And Dr. Josh, you want to, if there's happens to be anybody that doesn't already know you on this channel, you want to tell everybody like who you are, what you do, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure. I talk about slavery. Apparently, that's just what I do all the time and every day. No, I'm Josh Bowen. I'm an Assyriologist, so I study the languages and cultures of ancient Iraq, and I also am a Hebrew Bible Old Testament guy. So I spend a lot of time, I guess, what time I have free on social media and platforms like Clubhouse or YouTube or whatever, and sort of function as a, I don't know, a fact checker, maybe. John, do you think that's a fair way to say it about stuff in the Old Testament?
I mean, yeah, I definitely would go to you to fact check some like statements and whatnot. I definitely would use you as a resource for that.
Yeah, I guess I just have the books to be able to say, well, here's what scholars say about this. So here you go.
Well, so welcome everyone. You're watching SkepTalk tonight on the line, and it's September 4th, 2023, and the lines are open if you want to talk to us about slavery, which is Josh's favorite topic, by the way, as well as other Old Testament-y things. But the lines are open if you'd like to call for a question or argue about a certain topic. The number is 720-619-2288. And if you're calling from the U.S., that is, or if you're international from the U.S., you can call on the web using the link in the description. So we're going to be jumping to the calls here in a minute once we actually get a call in. So, you know, if you're a theist and you believe in God and you want a chance to prove that God exists, or if you want to defend God against genocide or slavery, then tonight would be the night for you to call in, because God definitely condones both of those things, slavery and genocide. He directly calls for it a lot of times. Now, leading into tonight, Dr. Josh and I have talked about this on my channel, but to a much wider audience, do you want to tell everybody about the behemoth of a book that just recently came out, both audiobook form and on Amazon, physical copy and Kindle copy? Tell them all about that, because that's a freaking behemoth behemoth that just came out.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess maybe 3 years ago, I wrote a smaller book called "Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery?" And it was sort of meant to be a sort of a I don't know, a smaller practical resource for people that wanted to talk about this particular topic. Did the Old Testament endorse slavery? Generally in like apologetic circles online, or in your family or something at Thanksgiving dinner. And then it became the thing that I'm known for. I'd say you got to be known for something, but I don't think slavery is the thing I want to be known for. But here we are. That sounded really bad. But I ended up writing a second edition that is this guy here. It's a little bit bigger than the first edition. It went from, I think, 200 pages to 700 pages. And it's meant, to be much more exhaustive. It goes through every law from the ancient Near East that has anything to do with slavery and gives it in translation, be it in a Sumerian text or Akkadian or Hittite or Ugaritic or whatever. And then goes through, of course, all the biblical laws and gives commentary on each. So, yeah, I mean, I'm excited about it. I just went to the BahaCon conference up in Sarnia, Ontario, and sold a bunch of copies up there. Gave a talk on the topic. So, Yeah, I mean, am I excited about talking about slavery in the Old Testament all the time? I mean, not really, but primarily, John, because like I just did this interview with Seth Andrews. And the one thing that has, and you've probably run into this as well, it used to be that like you would point out slavery in the Old Testament and be like, look, here are the laws. This is what it says. It's actually bad slavery. You know, it's not like good slavery or something that they try to argue it is. And they used to be like, no, it can't be, or yeah, it can't be real slavery. Now, man, more and more people are saying to me, well, maybe slavery is just not immoral. I mean, maybe it's just okay.
Well, I mean, it goes one of two ways, right? Either they shift slavery to be only indentured servitude, and they try to convince you of that, or they argue that, well, slavery wasn't all that bad. You know, kind of like how Florida's doing. You know, slavery wasn't all that bad. People got, educated vocationally to where they could use their skills after slavery.
How do we end up here, John? How do we end up here?
I mean, I don't know. In the current socio-political sphere, I mean, it just comes from people wanting to whitewash history, and I think that kind of plays into how a lot of Christians handle the more problematic portions of their book, because like I've listened to my fair share of apologists discuss the topic of genocide and slavery, and typically what they'll do is they'll either reduce slavery to only indentured servitude, and that was the only kind that was ever practiced, or they make it out to be like Israel was the only place that had laws that protected slaves.
Yeah.
And that was something that Frank Turek said recently. He was like, the laws in these other countries were worse. So that's why slaves would escape and come to Israel, because they had laws that protected them. And it was good slavery is what it amounted to. But I don't know how you rationalize good slavery, but that's what they were trying to do.
I mean, to be clear, like that's probably in this second edition, that's sort of the main focus of the second edition is to do comparative analysis. So like one appendix is several hundred pages long, and all it is, but like what it essentially is dividing up slave laws from the ancient Near East and the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and categorizing them. So, for example, one of the things that always comes out is, well, Exodus 21:16, says if you kidnap somebody, and even if you're found in possession of them, you're killed. And so, like, it's totally illegal to kidnap somebody and reduce them to slavery. And you're like, yeah. Well, here's like all the other ancient Near Eastern laws against kidnapping free people and reducing them to slavery. Guess what? It was illegal everywhere, right? So, it's like sick flex, bro. Sick flex.
Yeah, it's not the flex you think it is. And I put up on my channel as a short where G-Man and Veckel we're like, yeah, sure, we'll be your slaves. And at the end, G-Man was like, I'll even go further about this. And like the moderator cut him off. But what he was about to say, and I know exactly where he was going with this, he was about to say, well, I'll be your slave, but if I run away from you, you can't come get me. And it's like that. I remember that debate. That was one of the things that was heavily debated in that debate was whether or not slaves that run away can be caught and brought back. Yeah. And like that particular thing, I believe what that's in reference to is like basically what amounts to an extradition treaty or something like that, about extradition rights from other countries. Like, you couldn't hand back a slave that escaped into Israel or something to that effect. But it definitely didn't apply to the slaves that were in Israel. But in any case, so yeah, that's what G-Man was trying to contribute to the discussion. Which I noticed somebody in the comments of that short was like, "Can somebody show Black Twitter this?" and I was just
so uncomfortable.
Yeah, it was. Oh man! All right. Well, we do have a couple of callers lined up. If there are any theists in the chat that want to defend their God against, genocide. Well, of course, we're talking specifically about Christianity. But if you want to defend God against, the problem of evil or genocide, slavery, any of that kind of stuff, please do consider calling in because we'd love to hear from you. All right. So first up, we've got Evan from Colorado. And I think this is going to be all you, Josh. Hey there, Evan.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Hello. I'm not bad. How are y'all?
Doing well.
I'm struggling with my voice, but I'm okay right now. I got hot tea.
Heck yeah. Okay. I got a question. You could see in the notes, it's kind of long, I guess, but I just wanted to ask about some Sumerian historicity in regards to Gilgamesh and the Epic of Gilgamesh. And were there any characters in there that we could consider like historical, and how would we know?
Yeah. So everybody understands sort of the broader background of the question. We have, around this, right around 2000, 1900, 1800 BCE, we start to get stories in Sumerian in particular about a guy named Gilgamesh. And it's not the only place that we have them, but they start to, sort of come in full force. Different individual stories about Gilgamesh fighting the bull of heaven, or Gilgamesh going down, his friend Enkidu going down to the netherworld, and Gilgamesh fighting against the forest guardian Huwawa, and amongst others. And somewhere in the early to mid second millennium, you start to see this longer epic about this character Gilgamesh starting to develop. And certainly by the end of the second millennium, maybe around 1200 BCE, you have this very well preserved 12 tablet long epic of Gilgamesh. It's the one that, if anybody is familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh, that's the sort of the standard Babylonian version of it, is the one that we all know. But very, very quickly, like, Gilgamesh is the king of a city named Uruk, and he's sort of a wild king, and he does stuff to his people that the people don't like. And so the gods create this counterpart for him, whose name is Enkidu. And Enkidu is, it begins as like mostly animal, but sort of man-ish. Ultimately gets changed into a full human, and he and Gilgamesh become like this dynamic duo. And they go off and they do these different adventures together, but ultimately they piss off the gods, and Enkidu dies as the gods kill him. And so Gilgamesh realizes that he's going to die, and like hits him full force. And so he goes on this long trek to try to find immortality. And he finds himself at the end of the world, face to face with the flood survivor. And he says to the flood survivor, like, how did you get immortality? And the flood survivor says, well, let me tell you the story of the flood. And at the end of it, he says, the gods convened together to give me eternal life. And so, like, who's going to do that for you? Nobody. But there's this plant down in the sea that if you go down and get it, you can eat it, and it'll give you eternal life, or it'll rejuvenate you to your youth. And so he gets it. He goes back to Uruk, but on the way back, he stops by a pool of water, takes a bath, and a snake comes along and eats the plant of life. And so he misses out on this chance at immortality, makes it all the way back to his city, Uruk, and finally realizes that the way that he's going to gain immortality is through his name being remembered through the city that he's built. Okay, so that's sort of the broad stroke story. Now the question is like, is there anything in there that is historically reliable? So Gilgamesh was most likely a king in the early dynastic period. So first half of the third millennium BCE, there probably was a king named Gilgamesh. Certainly, he's not the king that we're reading about, right? Like he's not going out to the cedar forest and fighting, like semi-divine or divine beings, and those sorts of things, going and visiting the flood survivor. But we do seem to have some material culture that seems to bear his name. So there is some evidence that you can see. There's a book, a 2-volume book by a guy named Andrew George, a British Assyriologist who wrote on the Epic of Gilgamesh, and he goes through all of that. What little we have is sort of direct evidence, material culture that would suggest Gilgamesh. Outside of that, obviously, like the city of Uruk is a real city, and it was a very important city. It was the first city. So like there's verisimilitude to many points of the story. Obviously the cedar forest, the place that was supposed to be, is a forested area, right? So I mean, like there's again verisimilitude to the story, but obviously like Enkidu is not a real person. These are sort of characters that are brought in to move the story along. I don't know, did that sort of answer the question?
Yes, that is fascinating. Thank you, Dr. Josh.
Of course.
Can I follow up a little bit? Or unless
Please.
DE wants to say something about that? I don't know.
I really have nothing to contribute to this. I'm learning, just from hearing Josh talk.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up and ask, so I love that word verisimilitude. Is there like a lot of verisimilitude in the Old Testament verses, like using the same sort of principles? I did read your book, the audiobook. I listened to it.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that I really wrestle with when I hear like atheists and skeptics say things like this is when they say stuff like, these people that wrote the Bible are just like really stupid, or they're really dumb, those sorts of things. It's just not true, right? I mean, these are the people that were putting these texts together were the elites of the society, right? So they're very well trained, they're very educated, and they're incredibly creative. And so when you think about something, let's take something like the Exodus story, something that's very well known and that appears throughout the biblical text. The Exodus tradition has this, and like for anybody that maybe doesn't know what I mean by or what we're talking about when we say verisimilitude, like it has the ring of truth, right? If you watch the Spider-Man or you read the Spider-Man comics or whatever, it's New York City, right? I think it's New York City. Like it's the setting is like a real place. It's not like Metropolis or something with Superman, right? So like you could see a hot dog stand in New York City on the corner and be like, oh, that rings true to me, right? And so it doesn't mean that there is specifically the places that Peter Parker goes to are like actual stores or something, but they're stores that you can imagine being there, right? They seem like stores that you're familiar with in New York City. So if you were going to go try to like retrace the steps of, Peter swinging from certain buildings or something, you might not be able to do that. But when you're watching him, you're like, yeah, I can picture a crane, extending across the street like that, because I see those all the time. Okay. So when you read something like the Exodus traditions have real cities that they talk about, right? Cities that would have been in existence, many of them anyway. And this is why, scholars like James Hoffmeyer, when they do reconstructions and they try to, when they work on the Exodus, they're focusing in on the verisimilitude. They're focusing in on these cities that seem to resonate with what we know historically. Now, there are problems with them, and I won't go into them here. But when they talk about things like people from the region of Canaan being slaves down in Egypt, or when we talk about people escaping that are slaves, when you talk about a lot of these features that you see in the biblical tradition, they are things that like took place throughout the second millennium BCE. And so there's this ring of truth to it because the cities are there, and these things actually, a lot of these things sort of did take place, generally speaking, just not all at the same time. But that's what makes it such a genius, right? Work of I don't know, origin mythology, right? It's trying to set up something that the reader is reading this and going, man, this rings true with me. I can see this, being the case. And so, yeah, I mean, the biblical texts have lots of this. And I think that's what makes it something that has had, it's one of the reasons that it's had such an enduring, history, is that it has this verisimilitude.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Of course.
I don't know exactly where to go from here. I'm always just like, it's nice to learn something about history. I am trying to compare some different ideas, like Dr. Carrier's ideas as well, just looking at like the Bayesian analysis, or like trying to use probabilities to weigh these certain like individuals who might have existed. But I don't know. It's still there's not a lot of certainty, so I'm trying to get comfortable with that, I guess. I'll never know with certainty. So thank you for your perspective. I appreciate you, Dr. Josh.
Oh, of course. Thank you. It's great questions. Awesome.
All right. Thank you, Evan.
Okay. Yeah, have a good day.
I hope you have a good night, man.
All right. You too.
Take care, man.
All right. Awesome call. And we do have more calls lined up, but we'd more spaces for people to call in. So if you're a theist, especially, call in. Feel free to call in, and we will be able to get to you. Coming up this week on the show, we've got Dying Out Loud tomorrow, Tuesday, 6 p.m. Dave Warnock and Daryl Ray will be there. And then we've got the Hang Up on Wednesday with Matt. And then Takis on Thursday at 2 p.m. With Arden and Katy. So be sure to subscribe to the channel here and stay tuned for all of the great stuff coming up. So next up, we've got Emery. Hey there, Emery. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
Cool. So I was calling. Yesterday I had a discussion with my Jewish friend, and we were just kind of talking about the history of the Bible and things like that. And, I was explaining to her, like, oh, when I was growing up, my parents were fundamental Christians, and so we believed, like, the Bible literally, and, like, what were you taught growing up? And so at one point, I had said, growing up, believed all of the literal Bible, and then obviously deconstructed from there. And only recently did I kind of realize that the whole story with the Pharaoh and Moses and stuff wasn't true, and there was no Jewish slaves in Egypt at the time. And she kind of got weird and defensive of it, and we kind of had this weird discussion about it. And so I mean, when I saw that the two of you were hosting today, I thought I'd call in just to kind of clear up some of that, just because I want to make sure I'm, sharing the right facts or whatever. And I don't know a whole lot about it, so I just was curious about getting some perspective on that.
Did you want me to handle that?
Yeah, if you wanted to. I know you're a lot better with the Old Testament than I am as far as this realm goes. So
Oh, I don't
feel
know if
free.
that's true, but I'm happy to do it. Yeah, no. So, so I guess right at the outset, as far as the consensus scholarly position on something like the Exodus, and this is subject matter experts, right? These are the people that work in the field on this particular topic. What they would say is what they all agree on is that the way that the biblical texts lay out in the narrative the story of the Exodus, we know that it didn't happen that way, right? Outside of that, there's a lot of debate, I suppose, about is there a historical kernel that stands behind the story? For example, like we know, or we have pretty good reason to believe that sometimes a few slaves did escape. Like we know that there were Canaanite slaves that were down in Egypt during the period. They would not have been considered Jews, right? But I mean, like people that lived in Canaan were taken as slaves down into Egypt, and we know that it seems reasonable to believe that some of them did escape. Right? We have some documentation that seems to support that. Now, we're not talking about thousands and thousands. We're talking about like two, right? Like one, two people. And certainly that's not to suggest those are the only two that would have escaped, but I mean, that's what we seem to have the documentation for. So is it possible, likely, whatever, that as the second millennium sort of drew to a close, and there was all kinds of political instability in the region with Egypt and in Canaan, that there was a small handful or whatever of Canaanite slaves that were down in Egypt that escaped and made their way up into the highlands of Canaan, where this sort of nascent proto-Israel was forming. And said, we were like miraculously delivered from Egypt by our God Yahweh, and that small handful of people joining to this group that was already calling themselves Israel, sort of that was adopted and grew as a foundation myth for them. Sure, like that's possible, but is it required? No. We do seem to have pretty good evidence that there were different versions of an Exodus story. So you had a northern version, you had a southern version, you had a Transjordan version, and they all emphasized different things. And it wasn't until you sort of had the canonical version, if we call it that, brought together toward the end of its redaction history, that we start to get all of these components sort of put together. So yes, you are correct that most scholars, certainly the consensus of subject matter experts, would say, no, the biblical texts are not a historically reliable source to try to reconstruct, from what we consider to be historical methodology or to our historical standards, what happened on the ground in the late Bronze Age. As it relates to a group of people leaving Egypt. Is there something behind it? Maybe, but not necessarily.
And just to add on to what Josh is saying, I would in a conversation like that, I would probably focus I would add that there's like a nuance to the discussion of historical texts in general, but like if we're talking about what exactly happened in the Exodus or in anything in the first 5 books of the Bible that's supposedly written by, I believe that's supposed to be written by Moses, is traditionally who is said to be the author. That I would focus on some of the more major aspects of it, like, for instance, the slaughter of all the firstborn Egyptian children. Like, We don't have evidence that happened. As far as how it occurred, like in the Exodus account, and other things like that. That I would probably focus on, like saying, well, these major points that are in the Old Testament, the fact that we don't have any evidence to support them as being historical, what kind of value historically, do these texts have as far as our discussion goes? Like as far as, our discussion of the historicity of the Old Testament or whatnot, what kind of value does that bring us if, we can't discern between fact and fiction? Because while there could be some factual elements of it, I think it'd be incredibly difficult to figure out what those factual elements are. And I don't see how that could help any discussion that we're having now. Like, I'm not exactly sure what context y'all were talking like about the Old Testament stuff in, if it was just sort of general, but, that I guess that whenever I talk about that kind of thing, that's kind of where my head's at whenever I have those kind of discussions.
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, it's always like things like this have kind of come up with her in the past, and I mean, I already kind of have to I'm not sure where she stands on a lot of this stuff, because she does still say that she's like religiously Jewish, but she's also atheist, and I don't understand that, and I don't even want to try to question her on all that because I don't want to get into like some whole argument or whatever. And so I know she has a lot of strong cultural ties to her like religion, but like is also like very like wants to know like the science behind stuff and like the true history or whatever. And so like when I thought like, this would be an okay conversation to have and like, whatever. And she was like, like immediately was like, well, what's your source? And was like fact checking. And I was like, well, admittedly, I don't know a ton about this. This is just something I heard. Like I didn't mean to like offend you or anything like that. But, it was just kind of like one of those things where I'm like, okay, like, is she applying healthy skepticism to what she was raised to believe? Or is this like, am I wrong? Is this like, like it just kind of was an awkward conversation. And yeah.
So Emery, if you're interested in Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, Volume 2, I have a chapter where I go through and summarize all of the evidence that we have for the Exodus, specifically from for this discussion. And then in the archaeology chapter, I do the evidence for the conquest. And those two things are like directly linked, right? Because even if someone were to say we have really good evidence that suggests we should think that the Exodus story is true as the Bible presents it, you have to then look at the archaeology of the conquest, because 40 years later, you got to have this massive group of people coming into the land of Canaan to take it over, right? And we just don't have that. And so I go through in those two chapters, I go through that sort of in perhaps painstaking detail. I guess it depends on how you look at it, but
thank you. That's a good source. I'll definitely look into that.
And Seth Andrews reads that audiobook. So I mean, like, if for no other reason than to hear the golden voice of Seth Andrews. You know what I mean?
True.
All right. Well, Emery, thank you so much for calling in. Was that the only question that you had?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your answers and your time. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emery. You have a good night.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
All right. Well, we do have we're starting to get people lined up. I do want to get to this next caller though. I'm really hoping that it's not going to be too contentious. But we're gonna pick up Shane. Hi there, Shane. How you doing?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Sorry.
That's okay. How you doing, Shane?
All right. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. So what's up?
Good. So yeah, last time you were on the caller that was talking about the history. And yeah, it did get kind of
Hold on,
heated.
Shane. I don't know if you're like on speakerphone, or what. It was a little hard for me to hear.
Okay. Yeah, I was having an issue with that, the call screener. I guess maybe I'll just try and call back at a different time.
We can hear you all right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're good now.
Cool. All right. So yeah, last week there was or last time John was on, there was a call that got a little heated about the historicity of Jesus. And the caller mentioned that he thought Jesus was a failed Messiah, and John was saying that he doesn't think that that's really established. And then it got to the passage of Isaiah 52 and whether that's a messianic prophecy or whether it was considered that at the time or not. And then it kind of devolved into a my scholars versus your scholars sort of thing. So I figured, I guess, since we have the opportunity that Josh is here, maybe we could, I'd like to know what his opinion is on that passage and maybe what the scholarly consensus would be of whether or not the Jews considered that to be a messianic prophecy at the time.
So this is a question about mythicism?
Yes. Well, more or less.
Yeah.
Sorry. Shane, I don't know if you can see that. I sort of faded off the screen there.
No. Sorry, no. I'm not watching the...
Yeah, no.
Well,
go ahead, John. Yes.
Well, so I mean, I was just going to clarify one thing, is that it's not that, like, when you say the Jews believe this, that's a little bit broad strokey, because there's multiple different groups of Jews at the time. They were all interpreting things in different ways. And so really it's just, were some Jews interpreting it in this fashion is what the question should more accurately be. Because saying were the Jews interpreting it this way kind of makes it seem like it was more monolithic than the Jews actually were at the time. So, Josh, if you want to weigh in on this, I'm perfectly fine with it. I know where you stand, in your fade off there, but feel free
That's
to
my stance, right?
weigh in on it.
Slowly, I'm that Homer Simpson fading into the hedge. That's what I'm doing. No, so obviously there are two different questions, I think probably built into it. One is, what was the sort of the original intent of Isaiah 52 to 53? And then how did later, Jewish interpreters, understand that text? So I'd be able to say a little bit about the former, although that is obviously an incredibly complex passage, even from the standpoint of the first question. But I wouldn't be able to comment on later Jewish interpretation of it because it's outside of my field, unfortunately. And I don't know that any comment that I would give on the former, I've lost track of my former and latter questions, but I don't know that I would have a lot to add here that would be relevant, I think, probably to the question that's being discussed, if that makes sense.
And I would totally agree with Josh here on the former. Probably, I think me and or Josh and I are in lockstep with the original intent of the passage versus, how later Jews might have interpreted it.
Okay, that makes sense. So I think we found a point of agreement and a point where, you two kind of deviate.
Well, I mean, we deviate in that Josh is not taking a position on it because he doesn't. At least this is what I got, Josh, was that you just simply don't know enough about the topic, and so I mean, we're deviating only in that I've spent a significant amount of time reading the scholarship on it, whereas Josh hasn't.
Yeah, and if anybody knows anything about me, that's like my motto, right? I'm going to get a T-shirt made up, maybe a bow tie. I'll make a bow tie that says that's not my field. It's not my field.
Well, you steal those bow ties from Kent Hovind anyway, so.
That's right. I get who is it? Bill Nye, the science guy. I get a lot of comparisons there, but I think bow ties are cool.
But
Well, cool,
as far as on the top, sorry, you go right on ahead there, Shane.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, unless you have anything else to add, I guess that kind of clears up what I was wondering.
Okay. Well, I mean, I was just gonna say, I know that call got contentious the last time I was on, but I mean, I didn't want it to devolve into just my scholars are better than your scholars, but it's just in the call, it got a little frustrating when, first it was, scholars don't say this. And then I bring out, I think I literally counted on my hand 12 different scholars, which, looking at like the scholarship, since then, it's actually like in the about 30 or so scholars now that assert the position that, the suffering and dying Messiah, was a pre-Christian Jewish idea, that was, in circulation at the time. But it always happens that it's, oh, well, no scholars say this. And then you show them that scholars say this, and that there are some scholars out there that are experts in that particular, field that affirm this. And then it's, well, you don't have the right scholars. Like, these scholars are better than the scholars that you said.
I think the point he was maybe trying to make, if I could try and steelman what he was saying, is like, have you ever heard of the Project Steve, as far as evolution? Like, creationists will say, oh, here's a list of 100 scholars that say, that verify creationism. And then the Project Steve is, here's a list of like 10 times as many biologists that are just named Steve or Stephanie that disagree with that. So I think he was trying to say that, yeah, you can point to 30 scholars, but is that really the consensus, or is that the consensus opinion of that passage among scholars that are experts in that area?
And, honestly, I don't know how to translate that competently to the topic that we're discussing here. Because that's a hard science, evolution, and this is history, which is not as certain as science is. And, with history, you're working with, what most likely happened, what was most likely the case. And so it would be similar, if I was, I had a list of people that were from, creationist, apologetic schools, let's say. But I mean, the kinds of scholars that I was pulling out, is like Daniel Boyarin, who's a rabbinical scholar that, he's retired now, but he used to be a very prestigious scholar at UC Berkeley. And he's a premier Talmudic scholar who was affirming this, saying that, traditionally it's seen that the Christians perverted the understanding of Isaiah 52 and 53 in order to justify their Savior dying. But he, in no uncertain terms, he says this has to be done away with. This idea was pre-Christian. Like this idea happened prior to the advent of Christianity. It's a paraphrase, but nearly an exact quote from Boyarin. And I mean, he's not alone in this. You've got George Brooke, who also cites this. You've got Martin Hengel, who also cites this. And so these are not, like, to compare them to like people from Creationist Ministries International or from AIG or something like that, I feel like is an incredible disservice to these scholars in these fields. I feel like anybody that's suggesting that they are like creationists in the evolutionist debate, in the evolution debate, I feel like they are being very, I can't think of a better word, but very shitty towards these scholars. And I think that it's uncalled for, personally.
So I think the point that the other caller was trying to make, and I'm not sure if this, how, I haven't, but he was saying that a lot of the scholars that either you cited or that do agree with that are evangelical Christians and have a vested interest in that narrative being true. And he was saying kind of like
Daniel,
it would be similar to be like if you were a Darwin mythicist and you were citing answers in Genesis to disprove the existence of Darwin. I'm not sure if that's
comparing
exactly what's going on, or
Shane, you keep comparing like scholars from Berkeley and all of these other prestigious institutions to these people from like AIG who are obviously not of the same kind and quality of scholars as what I'm talking about here. So, I mean, if you're going to sit there and try to say that Daniel Boyarin, who's himself a Jew, is too Christian and is affirming this idea because of some Christian leaning, I feel like you're going to have a tough time selling that. And
well,
so,
obviously not him, no.
Huh?
I said obviously not him, no, because he's Jewish, right?
Okay. So now we're down to cherry picking which scholars. I feel not that necessarily that you were cherry picking, but in this hypothetical conversation that we seem to be having, it's now down to cherry picking this idea. Cherry picking who supports this idea.
So earlier, when talking about the Exodus, Josh mentioned the scholarly consensus of experts in the field and whether or not they would say no, there doesn't seem to be evidence to support this Exodus the way it happened, or if there was Jewish slaves in Egypt at that time. So I'm wondering if the scholarly consensus would say that about Isaiah, or that the passage we're talking about is whether it's a prophecy or not. Because it seems like you were okay with using scholarly consensus then, and then here, when it's kind of against you, you're saying, well, this is just a soft science and we can't trust scholarly consensus and that sort of thing. So it seems like it's a little bit of a double standard when it comes to things like
that. I don't see, when you start to bring up consensus, it's going to be hard to, to judge this, like I could tell you that, like, if I tell you there are over 30 scholars that are not mythicists, for one, for two, not all of them are Christian. But if I tell you that there's over 30 scholars that either assert or prove that there was a pre-Christian suffering and dying Messiah, how in the hell are you going to make the determination that that is the consensus?
Well,
I don't know how you would actually do that.
About how then you would talk about the number of scholars that don't conclude that and compare the two numbers, where 30 versus like 2,000. I don't know what the number is. Is it 200?
Oh, okay. So John Collins. There's John Collins. I know John Collins. He doesn't prescribe to the pre-Christian suffering and dying Messiah thing.
So this is why I was kind of trying to ask Josh if he knows what the scholarly consensus about this is, because I know you can talk about, you could probably name more than 30. You could maybe name 40 or 50, especially if you're saying people.
Oh, why don't we just start pulling shit out of our ass then? Hey, you know what? I've got 150,000 scholars right now that affirm my position. Oh, but what if we have 300,000 scholars that don't affirm your position? Well, let's just keep pulling numbers out of our ass. So, I don't see the benefit in talking about this.
Sorry, my daughter. Maybe since my daughter needs my attention, we should end the call here. Thank you very much. I didn't mean to be as contentious as it was, but I enjoyed the discussion and the conversation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Shane, for calling in. Appreciate you. I hope you have a great night there, man.
Thanks, you too.
All right.
And there is
See you later,
nothing
Shane.
better than the sound of kids on the phone. Like I have 5 of my own and 2-year-old twins. So I always apologize for them, but everybody always is like, "Oh, I think they want to hear. People want to hear the kids more than they want to hear me." So.
All right. I do have to say, I always love hearing kids on the phone. I loved hearing Xander when I would call him on the phone. So I definitely echo that. Next up, we've got Lisa from Colorado, I do believe. Hi there, Lisa. How you doing?
All righty. How are you guys?
Well.
Cool. When I did a lot of, I guess you call it deconstructing from your faith. I did a lot of that in, say, the last 2 or 3 years. But one of the areas that I tried to do some research on that I really couldn't find very much in the way of sources is, do we really know who wrote any of the books of the Bible, particularly the Old Testament? Do we have reasonable certainty about any of those books? And if you know of a great resource for that contains a lot of information, I would love to get a hold of that, please.
Yeah. Welcome to the fun. There's so much complication when it comes to authorship of biblical texts, ancient texts in general. There's obviously, we could talk for hours probably about this. But let's take something like the Pentateuch, right? Because that is something that it comes up so frequently. Who wrote Genesis through Deuteronomy? Of course, traditionally, people have held that, from antiquity, that Moses wrote it. And then, of course, over the last, since the 17th century, and even before that, things, were called into question about that. But certainly in full force in the past several centuries, this notion of single authorship, certainly Mosaic authorship, has been laid to rest, right? And so, it's certainly still up in the air where these stories specifically came from, how they were collected, how long were they orally transmitted before they were committed to writing, how long were they committed to writing for before they were compiled into the canonical sources that we have. All of that stuff is very, very contentious. It's sort of the two main theories that scholars debate about now, and of course there are like subsets of many of them. But there's one theory called the documentary hypothesis, which, in very simplistic form, holds that there are long sources that contain the majority of the story from like Genesis to Numbers, but they tell the stories differently. They have different ways of telling certain events, and so they kind of got woven together at the same time. Sometimes there's disagreement about that two of them got put together first and a third got tacked on, then a fourth. But nonetheless, you have like sort of these complete sources that get brought together all at once, or added together over time in that sense. There is another that says that you have smaller groups of texts, groups of little stories that get brought together here in one section, like the story of the patriarchs, for example, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that gets brought together. and then the Exodus, Exodus through Numbers kind of gets brought together, and then those two things get edited together with the Joseph story, kind of, being the mortar in between the two, to sort of tie them together. And then later there's another redaction to that, and then another redaction, and so on. So yes, incredibly complex. Scholars do not agree on how that worked. For the Pentateuch, there is a fantastic resource. It's usually sitting right there on the shelf, but I've got it downstairs because I'm going through it again. But it's called the Oxford Handbook to the Pentateuch, edited by Jeffrey Stackert and Joel Baden, two giants in the field. One's at Yale, one's at Chicago. And, that's going to give you a great introduction to all things Pentateuch. Obviously, that's just the first 5 books, right? So you have all the other books of the Hebrew Bible, and they all contain similar redaction histories. So something like the book of Isaiah, everybody wants to just read Isaiah and say that it's written by some guy named Isaiah. But you've got first Isaiah, you've got second Isaiah, you've got third Isaiah. Are these Isaiah's actual people? Or are they schools that followed the prophet? Something like the book of Ezekiel, how much of it is, updated through redaction? In other words, it's all very, very complicated. And even in places, I'll land with this, sorry, everybody. But even in something like the book of Ezekiel, where we think we do have a very clear Ezekiel core, right? Or an Ezekiel, major section of the text, it still underwent, additional redaction or reworking. And so, yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly complicated process. And this idea that we can say, so-and-so wrote this, it's just, it's vastly more complex than that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Is there consensus as to the age of the oldest manuscript that we have of the Pentateuch, or even a portion of it? Is there agreement on what the age is speculated to be?
So I'm going to answer the question I think you're asking, and I'll answer the other one. So if we're talking just about the manuscript evidence that we have, the oldest texts that we have come from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And of course, like Dr. Kip Davis is the sort of one of the big experts on the Dead Sea Scrolls. So definitely check out his work on that. If what you're asking is and those, yes, those are agreed upon, the dating of those manuscripts, going back generally to the late 3rd, 2nd, 1st, centuries BCE. Now, as far as when those texts began to be written or when they came down, that stuff is still, in many places pretty hotly contested. But most scholars would say, you've got writings from, maybe 8th, 7th centuries, the earliest. You certainly have traditions, it seems, that show up in the Pentateuch. For example, passages like Exodus 15, that are probably significantly older traditions. Numbers 5, the Balaam oracles, but these in later numbers, but these are brought into the text at a later time. How far back those go? I mean, I think if we're uber generous, we could say maybe the Song of Moses in, or the story in, or the song in Exodus 15 goes back to, the 11th century, maybe. I mean, that's pretty early. It's pretty generous, pretty conservative, but the Song of the Sea. So yeah, I mean, it's. But I mean, as far as committed to writing, much later than that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I was wondering if you could please repeat the name of the person you mentioned relevant to the Dead Sea Scrolls. I didn't catch that name.
His name is Dr. Kipp, Kipp Davis, Davis, and he's got a YouTube channel. I think it's just called Is it just called Kipp Davis? But he's got a book coming out. I don't know when, but it's in the works at least on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And of course, he's got other publications out on the Dead Sea Scrolls. But I mean, he's phenomenal. Like he was handpicked by one of the best in the field. So like he's excellent with Dead Sea Scrolls work. So Kipp Davis.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. All righty. Well, thank you. That gives me some things to check into, to explore a bit. And I realized there's probably not a really straightforward, absolutely concrete answer to any of this.
Well, except for the Gospels, Lisa. John would stand behind me on this one, I'm sure. We know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all wrote 4 independent sources. So, and we know that. I'm just kidding. Please. That's going to get clipped. It's going to go out there. Look how dumb Josh is. I know it. Just kidding.
So
Sorry.
Cool. All righty. Well, thank you very much. That
Thank you,
definitely
Lisa.
gives me a starting point. All righty. Thank you. Have a good evening, guys.
You too, ma'am.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Lisa. You have a great night.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. Awesome. Well, we are about to go into a couple of theist calls, but we do have plenty of lines open. So if you want to call in and argue with me about mythicism, feel free. I'm sure it'll piss a lot of people off. Or if you want to, we do have one person to talk about slavery. And so, we're going to jump to that person right now. That's Andrew. But, if you have something that you want to say, but you don't want to call in, feel free to super chat. We support the show here by the super chats, by the memberships and Patreon and everything like that, which I don't think I've mentioned the Patreon yet. If you go to patreon.com / crap, is it the line? I had my notes pulled up right here. Patreon.com / call the line, and you can become a member of the Patreon, and you can help support the show here. So if you we're going to be heading on over to Andrew, talk some slavery. Hey there, Andrew, how you doing?
What's up, heathens?
What's up, heathen? You're not a heathen, but okay.
I got that from John's channel.
Yeah.
For those who didn't get it.
Yeah.
No, the title from today, Slavery in the Bible, it's kind of a misnomer, because no Christian denomination or church today supports slavery. So just because the Bible did endorse slavery then, no Christian today supports it. It's an active and living faith. It's an active and living document that brings out the best in us. It continues to evolve with times and cultures, so it is a progressive document by definition. And so demonizing it is kind of
okay. So
I don't want to be
Andrew,
honest, but yeah.
No. Don't start with the dishonesty shit. Okay, let's just stop that right on the outset, because it's not dishonest to say that Christianity supports slavery and condones genocide and all this other stuff, because it is in the Bible. Now, so are we starting off from a common place that you acknowledge that in the Bible there are verses that has God supporting slavery and genocide?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's a good starting place, because at least, that kind of gets us past arguing over whether or not there was actually slavery going on then. So now what we're talking about is this idea of a changing interpretation of the Bible. Now, what does that say to you about God? Like the fact that the Bible, apparently the interpretation of the Bible, or that it's some kind of living I guess, interpretations, something that changes all the time. What does that say about the God of the Bible? Does that mean that God changes over time, or does God remain the same over time?
There might not be any. We might not be able to know. It says that our view of God changes over time, and as we evolve, our view of God evolves.
Wait, hold on. But so, are you saying that the Bible then was wrong when it said that God is the same in the past as he is in the present as he will be in the future? Like, is that something that the Bible just lied about?
We can't verify that. God could have, from the beginning, not like slavery, but he could have allowed humans just to do it, and they're writing in the name of God. But again, we can't verify that. We don't have access to God right now.
You don't think that the Bible is the inerrant word of God?
I do not think it's inerrant. I do think God speaks to us through it, but I do not believe it is inerrant.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
John, sorry, if just for a second. So I just want to say thank you, Andrew, because I think that if right now we could snap our fingers and take this huge step forward, and Christianity as a whole thought more like along the lines of your interpretive framework for the Bible, my job would be a whole lot easier. In fact, I probably wouldn't be on here all that often, right? Because most of the people that I engage with on this topic in particular, but obviously many others, will hold to the inerrancy and inspiration of the text in such a way that I have to hear people say on the regular, when I say to them, look, here in passages like Exodus 21 and Leviticus 25, this is like real slavery and it's bad. Instead of saying what I'm so thankful that you're saying, instead of them saying, look, this is a living document, and we kind of reinterpret it, we wrestle with it, those sorts of things. They say, well, maybe slavery is not immoral, right? So thank you. I just want to say that thank you for having that interpretive framework. And I think from there, like these are the types of things I think what John's asking are the good questions, right? Good things to wrestle with. But I want to call out the fact that I really appreciate that type of the ability to sort of flex with the text, because and I'll land, but the people that I engage with are the people that are saying, nope, the text says here that God said that this is good in the law, or this is allowed in the law, or whatever it is that they say about it. So we should be stoning people, maybe, right? Or we should be, putting to death rebellious children, or whatever, right? These are things that like on the real, have to deal with regularly. So I just want to say thank you for that interpretive framework.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, much appreciated. I'm glad we have some common ground. May I give a quick response to that?
Please.
Before John continues, even I used to be a fundamentalist, and even most fundamentalists today, the vast majority, would not agree that slavery is okay for modern times. So even most fundamentalists are technically modernists, and they are modernists with their Christianity. They just don't know it.
Right. The problem, Andrew, is this is going to sound so bad, and I'm so sorry, but it's reality, right? I sometimes regret starting down this path of trying to show fundamentalists that it is genuine slavery in the Bible, because before I did, they thought exactly as you're describing, right? Because they didn't really dig down into the text. They were just like, well, obviously God can't command slavery, right? And so, like, obviously that's so no, we're not for slavery, because I know today in my heart that slavery is no good, and so it can't be that. It's only now that I've shown them, look, it really is like bad slavery, right? And that sounds weird. Of course, it's slavery, right? It's real slavery. That this has become an issue. It's like they say, well, I guess maybe slavery is not so bad. It's like, so I do regret going down that path sometimes. But at any rate, I agree with you that they don't realize. Maybe the way they say that is they don't actually realize what the biblical texts say about that topic.
Yeah.
Sorry, John, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I mean, I don't know. I guess my question is about the slavery topic is like, how do you how do you take the implementation of slavery by the Israelites at the behest of God? Like, how does that factor into your framework?
Okay. Well, fact number one, it does not disprove that there is a God. So that I just want to leave that there. That's a different discussion, though.
Wait, can you repeat
secondly, that? It does not disprove that there is a God.
Okay. So
there could still be a God of Israel. There could still be miracles. None of that disproves any of that. But that's my first point. But it's sort of unrelated. But it's a foundational thing. And point number two. Hold on. Maybe Israel's view of God. Okay.
Hold on. Maybe let's go back just to that first point here, because I think it really kind of depends on how you characterize the God of Israel. Like, do you characterize the God of Israel as being omnibenevolent and omniscient and all powerful and all that? Like, is that part of your definition for the God of Israel?
That's no, because the way God was described in Genesis through Deuteronomy, he's not all knowing. So I wouldn't even describe the God of Israel that way, Yahweh. I would describe the God of Christian theology in that way.
So are you separating out the Old Testament God from the New Testament God? Like they're different gods?
They're different depictions of God. They're different interpretations of God by different peoples who lived in different times and who spoke different languages. Okay,
well, yeah, but I mean, regardless of interpretation, the claim is that there's one God, and this one God is either, an all good God. Like, do you think that God is all good?
If there is one, yeah.
Okay, well, sure. I mean, if you think that God is omnibenevolent, then slavery existing in Christianity and in Judaism, just Abrahamically in general, it does disprove your God. Because there's no way that your God can be omnibenevolent and also condone slavery.
That is true. That statement is true. He can be omnibenevolent and condone slavery. But the Israelites could be wrong about God condoning slavery. That text can be wrong, and God can be omnibenevolent, and he does not condone slavery. Even within some passages, it says, love your neighbor as yourself. That could actually come from God, and that violates slavery itself. Love your neighbor as yourself. That is.
So I'm having a lot of problems. I'm having a lot of problems with this because it seems to me like you're cherry picking out the worst portions of the Old Testament and just claiming that the Israelites were wrong about what God told them. And that seems to be your tactic here.
Sure.
I mean, do you understand how that's not logical? Like to just cherry pick the things you don't like.
Does that. Everybody does that. That's what we do with the Constitution. You guys are Americans. You guys don't
what
believe in slavery.
What does the Constitution have to do with
America was
this?
founded on slavery.
I mean,
America was founded on
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Americans. Right,
okay.
Right. You guys cherry picked the Constitution. The original Constitution had slavery. You guys amended it, but you're still American.
Right, because the Constitution was made to be changed, and it's not a holy text that comes from an absolute and inerrant God.
I think that might, and Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry, just trying to make sure I see him. I think that might be what Andrew is saying, is that he doesn't think that the biblical texts fall into that category. Is that correct, Andrew?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Okay, but then what's your methodology for picking out like which verses are not from God and which verses are from God?
Right. It's a journey. You spend your whole life trying to discover who God actually is, or if there is a God, or whatever
methodology. Methodology is not a fucking journey. Like I'm going down to the 7-Eleven to pick up a Coke. It's not a journey. Like what is your methodology for picking out what was God's actual commandments and stuff in the Old Testament is not like I'm just asking you how, like when you read, like let's say you read Leviticus 25:44 through 46, there's an obvious God condoning slavery. You take that as not being from God.
Correct.
And how do you come to that conclusion?
Because I believe that God is the ultimate good, the ultimate highest value in the universe, or so if there's something bad in the holy text, that can't be from God. That's just the weakness of humanity.
Fucking impeccable fucking logic right there. I mean, this is what?
The Bible does this itself. It amends itself. Like there's two different accounts of a story where God tempted David to kind of census, and then God kills a bunch of people out of anger. But that's the rendering in Samuel. And in Chronicles, it renders it differently. It says that the devil made David do it. So Israel itself is reinterpreting these stories. That's what spirituality is. It's amending itself. It's trying to figure out ultimate truth.
And just to reiterate, so like John, sorry, maybe this isn't the right approach, but it's the one that feels right to me. Like these are the kinds of Christians we want around if we're gonna because for real. See again, thank you, Andrew. Because like what I don't want to have to engage with is people that say, hey, here it's like it's in the book, and even though it feels really wrong to own slaves as property, here it says in the text that I can, so maybe it's okay. Like, thank you. Like, sorry, I know, John, these again, the methodology stuff is a really good question. I think it's a really good discussion. But like in the end, we want Andrews. Sorry, that sounds really patronizing. I don't mean it that way. But yeah, I'm going to go back on mute. Okay. Sorry.
I guess I just don't understand the point in following the Bible if you've literally just sort of invented like your own idea about what God is that seems to be separate from what the Bible says about God.
The Bible says multiple things about God. It disagrees with itself on who or what God is.
Yeah, because it had multiple different fucking authors. It had multiple different authors.
Not at the end.
Do you think the same person that wrote Chronicles is the same person that wrote Kings? Like those are two groups of books right there.
No, they were written hundreds of years apart.
Right. So I mean, they're like when there's a difference, it's not like one's correcting the other. Those are contradictions.
I would say they're interpretations. That they're different ideas about who they think what God is. Yeah, they're interpreting events in their own in light of their own theology, and so.
Well, so Kings and Chronicles is more about the kingly transition of power and like how like the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom and how all that kind of went. There's a little bit about God in it, but I feel like a big gist of, correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, but I feel like a big gist of both of those groups of books is just about the different conquests and the kingships and everything like that took place. So, I mean, if you're
certainly, though, I mean, he's correct. Like, looking at Chronicles is reworking many of these stories in such a way as to make different theological points. I think that, like, this sort of interbiblical intertextuality exegesis can be seen in places like really prominently, in places like the Book of Daniel, for example, a text obviously written in the second, at least compiled in the 2nd century. And, you read through Daniel chapter 9, and here the writer is like pulling from Jeremiah 25, from the 70 years of captivity, pulling from Leviticus 26 and the whole, courses of curses and 7 times more for your sins, and putting these things together to answer the question, why here so much later after the captivity are we still under the thumb of, other rulers, other powers? And it's trying to like re-explain that in a way that puts it back in the past in this like after the fact prophecy. But so yeah, I mean, but again, I think the big thing here, and Andrew, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the big thing for Andrew is that he's not viewing the text as divinely inspired and inerrant in the same way as a fundamentalist would. And so it allows this sort of freedom to, for example, think about one's own moral intuitions today. And I'll shut up. But as an example, like if we were to go back and use the Epic of Gilgamesh, since we were talking about it earlier, as if we were to say suddenly we think that is somehow divinely inspired, not inerrant, not a perfect text, but it's God like moving, the writer here to sort of lay down truth in a certain way that God wants us to have, but doing it through his own like fallible vessel, if you will. Then we would say, okay, what sort of stuff can we think probably came from God? We think that God would say really positive things and things about loving people. So the fact that we see Gilgamesh like weeping over Enkidu, who has died, that's probably something that comes from. But going out and killing innocent Huwawa out in the forest, that's probably not from God. Like, Andrew, do you think that's a fair sort of comparison?
Yes, very fair, very fair. It illustrates perfectly what I'm trying to explain. It seems John has only spoken to fundamentalist Christians, and I just want to emphasize the text never says, read me literally.
No, I would really appreciate if you didn't try to just assume who I've not talking to, because I've talked to a multitude of different Christians.
Yeah. The way that progressive Christians approach the Bible is it's basically what Josh was just explaining. That you don't have to take it literally, and you're still discovering who God is using the text, but you're adding culture, and as culture evolves, the text evolves with you and with culture, and so we get a better view of God the better we become. That's why I think it's a living document, and it's still the most powerful document in the world.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess in my view, the Bible wasn't written to be a living document. Like, that's just not how it was written. And that's also not how it's been taken for the past, thousands of years. Or, well, as far as the Bible goes, I guess thousands would actually cover it, because it'd be just shy of 2000.
Yeah, it was written to be interpreted and as a living document. Matthew and Luke copied Mark, and they had their own rendition, their own version of the gospel. They had Mark's gospel, and that should have been it. Mark wrote it with, this is the gospel. And then Matthew and Luke have their own gospels, their own Jesuses. So they're already doing
right. No, hold on, Andrew. So those gospels were written for specific communities, and those are just the gospel. Like they weren't different interpretations of anything. They were just different gospels. Like it wasn't meant to like, it's not like they wrote them so that they could be pulled together later as if to represent different interpretations, like in a Bible sort of setting. They were written, like Mark was written first, and then Matthew was written as a redaction of Mark because he was trying to write the true gospel. Each gospel author thought of their gospel as the gospel. So it wasn't that they were trying to correct anything or reinterpret anything. They were trying to provide what in their minds actually happened, and that was supposed to be the only gospel.
Right. They're writing the Gospels with their. I agree with that. They're writing. I think I agree with you. They're writing. They took Jesus' story that they heard, and then they're saying my interpretation. This is the gospel. They're giving their own interpretation of who they thought Jesus was, and that's what people do today. They preach their own version of what they think the gospel is, and that's how everybody.
Well, I guess,
and that's how
I guess I'm having a problem with this whole idea of interpretation, because each gospel writer were communicating what they thought happened. Like they were trying to represent it as if it were happening in history. And, I honestly don't like, if somebody has a different interpretation of, like, say, the Holocaust, typically those are Nazis that have the different interpretation. But you don't have, I feel like you have just straight up like what happened in history. And if anybody adds interpretation onto that, that becomes something more than just history. Like you've added stuff onto it. So I feel like, while there may be some historical core there, you've definitely added some things on there that we don't know is history. And so it becomes something else. But I don't know. I'm having a difficult time even traversing this topic, because it just kind of seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but it kind of seems to me like you've just basically come up with your own definition of the Abrahamic God, and whatever parts of the Bible currently fit your own preconceived notion of what God is, then you're fine with those portions of the Bible. Otherwise, the portions of the Bible just don't apply to your God. But I have a problem with it, mainly because it just seems like you're inventing your own God, and you're inventing your own God to match up with what you want God to be, instead of what Christianity says God is. And I totally agree with Josh that we do want more Christians that are willing to shuck some of these, worst parts of Christianity's past and move past that, but I think that at some point you've got to admit that you fundamentally changed the Abrahamic God, and he's no longer that God. He's something else. I'm perfectly fine with you having something else. It's definitely not the Abrahamic God. It's its own monster, as it were. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right. It's something else.
Okay.
It's definitely something else. It's an ancient view of God, and I would just say progressive Christians have a modern view of God, and as we grow, we're gonna interpret. We can only interpret God by our own experiences. That's just human nature.
Okay. All right. Well, unless you've got something else to talk about, Andrew. I think that we're going to have to cut it off here, because we do have a couple more callers to get to.
Yeah. Have a good night, gentlemen. Nice talk.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hey, thank you, Andrew. Appreciate you.
All right. Thank you. Pleasure. Bye.
Bye. Also, that was another caller from Florida, which I feel like has a bit of a white supremacy problem right now. So I feel really sorry for anybody from Florida that's calling in tonight. Next up, we've got Martin, who's a theist. Hit the button, but it didn't actually pop up immediately. Hey there, Martin.
Hello?
How you doing?
How's it going? Not too bad. Can't
Pretty
complain.
good.
Thank you for taking the call.
Yeah, no problem. I see you didn't provide any pronouns. Did you refund Starfield?
What is that?
It's a video game. Never mind. It's a joke.
I'm
Anyways,
a cross-dresser. I mean, I don't care what people call me. I'm a total nut case. But I mean, I do know the truth, and I feel like if people understand spectrums, a lot of this would make a lot more sense. So, like,
okay.
anyone can become a god, or anything can become a god that can control the space and the spectrum within that space. And just because you're in a small bandwidth of an uncomfortable part of the spectrum doesn't mean that, like, you know, like the snake eats the tail. Just because you're getting eaten doesn't mean that the tail doesn't. I mean, the head doesn't know what it's doing, basically. But a lot of these stories go back to Gilgamesh, like they were talking about, and all the truth has been hidden. I don't know if you guys know about I'm dyslexic, so I can't really talk very well. Stagnography or whatever, where they hide messages in video and audio, and messages have been hidden in art and in the numbers of every mainstream religion. The truth has been known, is basically what I want to say, since day one. They just have hid it. And there's stories about this where Enoch tells of the senior number of 7 archangels annoyed at the chiefs of the 10s. And they were basically annoyed that they were telling people too much knowledge too fast. So they're waking people up too fast. And if everyone wakes up, the whole system kind of breaks down. So people can't really become gods, because we all are actually just one God.
Hold on. No, I'm sorry. Hold on. I gotta stop you for a second, Martin, because at one point we're in math class, and I was trying to look for a calculator to do all this math with, and then all of a sudden we got transported to that scene from The Matrix where Keanu Reeves is waking up in that pool of like fetal fluid and everything, and now I don't really know where in the fuck we are. What?
Okay, so basically, I got stonewalled with the other stuff the other day, but I basically proved that I was right about, mRNA has graphene in it, nanoscale field transistors.
No, stop.
Yeah,
stop.
$5,000 if you can prove me wrong. And on Blank Vision, $5,000 if anyone can prove me wrong.
What the fuck are you doing? No.
But dude, because you guys are spreading lies, man.
And muted. I'm sorry if you're mRNA contains graphene. $5,000 if you can prove me wrong. Like, Martin, I'm gonna unmute you, but you have to learn how to have a conversation. Okay. For one thing, you're moving way too fast for my southern brain. Okay. I work a little bit slower. So please just slow down a little bit. Number 2, you absolutely cannot say shit like there's graphene in mRNA. You have no idea what those two things are because you're placing them together like you're adding 1 + 1, and that's not how anything works. So I'm going to give you another chance. Just to recap, speak slower, no more crazy conspiratorial shit, okay? So let's try this one more time. Unmuted.
Hello? What? Okay. Can I talk now?
Did you hear anything that I said?
You said slow down.
Right. Okay.
Should I talk or not?
No. I mean, all I asked you to do was slow down. If you understood that, then go ahead.
Okay. So all Einstein's work came from the ultraviolet catastrophe. And the ultraviolet catastrophe states, as the energy density goes to infinity, so does the frequency, meaning as the universe is expanding to an infinite, it is also being compressed to an infinite. Why is that happening? Because we're in a cube, a 3-dimensional cube. And all the physics lines up
hold
with
on.
this
Let me
and
ask.
all his
Hold
work.
on. No, I'm not trying to stop you. I'm just trying to ask questions. We're all in a cube. Is this like? Is it like one of those Rubik's cubes where maybe there's some kind of
Basically,
like larger entity?
a quantum.
Well, I mean,
quantum computers fract souls for information and power, if that makes sense.
that does not make
definitely
sense.
does.
Why is everything is divided here, right? And if you look at how
Divided
stars are
amongst
made,
who?
they're made the same way in black holes as qubits are made. Okay.
What the fuck was that?
AC/DC, who
What?
made who? That shows the band as qubits. So does Scorpions Rock Me Like a Hurricane shows the band as qubits.
What the fuck does
John,
this have to
I'm
do
actually
with
surprised that you're not following this. Okay, like it's got to be embarrassing.
This is like a roadmap. You can follow this all the way to the Dairy Queen.
I know it sounds crazy because you guys have never heard of it, but I'm talking. This is just science, man. And the problem is, nobody
it's not science. Hold on. Martin. Listen, you literally went from Einstein, some other kind of fucking thing over here to, have you heard AC/DC's Who's Got Who? And, also Scorpions over here, and their representatives 2 qubits. Now this ties into quantum mechanics in some kind of fucking fashion. We're all living in a cube. Neo is the one.
Why would Einstein's work go into all of his work of relativity go into quantum mechanics? Because he was a quantum scientist. Max Planck was his founder. Max Planck, there is no matter as such. Plato writes his allegory of the cave after the Platonic solids. What is not making sense to you guys? Like, you guys are not looking deep enough.
None of this is making sense.
You're not looking, you don't know anything. That's the whole thing. I have over $7,000 on the line for anyone that thinks they can prove me wrong, but none of you can think, so none of you can do anything.
I'm
$7,000 on blank vision up for grabs for anyone that thinks.
He's muted again. I am skeptical of the $7,000. Josh, what were you wanting to say?
Come on, John. Like, you can't be skeptical of that. My God, that's as true as anything he said.
I got $7,000 if you can prove that AC/DC didn't shove Scorpion up their ass and turn into 3 qubits.
Sorry, I don't know anything about the topic as it is. So.
It's so funny when you guys don't know anything, and then you think you're so, like, you guys are the truest believers of them all because you know nothing. You just believe you do, dude. You guys are fucking dumb as fuck.
Yeah, I mean, Martin, I'm happy to tell you I'm not a science guy at all. I have a very narrow expertise. Happy with that.
I've dropped Martin. I had fun with them for a second, but I dropped him. I don't. Whenever those kind of people call in, I like to have fun for a few minutes. I don't know what the fuck just happened. Like the past 5-6 minutes, I just have no fucking clue. But it will make a nice short, right? It'll make a nice short.
Oh,
it'll play perfect as a clip, I'm sure. All right. We got one last caller, Vandy. Boom. Hey there, Vandy. How you doing?
Hello. That was painful.
Yes, I agree. It was definitely fucking painful, but at the same time,
I'm a PhD physicist.
So good, you know. Hurts so
I have
good.
a PhD in physics. Everything he said was like a fork getting jammed into my ear, and then that same fork getting shoved into a toaster. It was
what? Come on, like I was taking copious notes there.
I mean, I hate to tell you, Dr. Josh, but you're not just gonna have to throw out that notebook.
Shoot.
You might need to get an exorcism and then launch it into orbit around the sun, a decaying orbit. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, you know, I barely passed my physics 3 class in engineering, but I'm glad that I'm not the only one that was like, where the fuck did, like, he started with Einstein and then he immediately moved to the Matrix, and I'm like, what the fuck
Yeah.
is this again?
Yeah. Yeah, it was awful. It was absolutely awful. I'd like to clarify just for everybody in chat. I'm not that Vandy. I'm a different. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I've heard you mention before, Dr. Josh. I just ordered the hardcover of your new book, or of the second edition rather of the book, because I already have the first edition.
Thank you.
But I wanted to ask. So I'm an atheist. But I wanted to ask. You have articulated before that there have been some people who have read and sort of thought about and analyzed the passages in the Bible that do talk about slavery, and they come to the horrifying conclusion that, you know what, maybe this means that slavery is good. And I was wondering if I could get a little bit more, like, if you could elaborate on that. And also, of course, John, I know that, like, I don't know where Dr. Josh lives, but I know that you live in the South, and so I don't know if that's also a thing that you've ever been exposed to or anything like that. So yeah, that was kind of what I was curious about.
Yeah, so I'm down in Southern Maryland, and
okay, below Mason-Dixon.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that what ends up happening is, again, sort of as Andrew, one of the previous callers was saying, this, like, a lot of even fundamentalists will come to the biblical text and they don't actually know what the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, says about something like slavery. And they know the story of the Exodus. They know, things like God came to Jesus has come to set the captives free and those sorts of things. And so they just sort of have this general understanding about love your enemy, love your neighbor. And so it must be that, when you think about something like slavery, if you don't actually go back into the legal sections, well, obviously God's against slavery, right? The problem is that,
sorry, Josh, can I just interrupt really quickly? Somebody in chat seemed to interpret what I said as though I may have been cool with slavery, and I just wanted to, like, get that, like, no, not at all. So I just wanted to point that out. So yeah, so I'll continue.
And I definitely didn't get that from what you said. So, and I guess what ends up happening, sort of to feed into that, is that, because the Bible uses things like slaves to Christ, don't be slaves of sin, that the idea sort of gets watered down, right, in the minds. I mean, I feel comfortable saying this. I was a fundamentalist evangelical for 26 years. Like, I feel comfortable saying that this is what happens in the mindset. And so it starts to lose some of the, I think, the effect when you read the word slave. What ends up happening, though, for me, is that I sort of systematically go back through with people in one-on-one conversations and say, okay, look, let's look at the actual passages. Let me do some, give you some commentary and walk you through what this stuff means. And at the end of it, they have become convinced very often that, yes, Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 15, Leviticus 25, these all say that genuine debt and chattel slavery are endorsed in the laws of the Hebrew Bible. Now, when you couple that with inspired, inerrant, immutable, I mean, these terms that come to the biblical text and come to God Himself, well, then it becomes very difficult for someone to say, as John, I think, was trying to point out earlier, if you hold that interpretation of the text, well, then, like, if God says it's okay back then, He can't then say, oops, it's not okay now, right? And so then, to sort of resolve that crisis, they will say, well, and this is how I normally hear it, slavery in and of itself is not immoral. Owning another person as property in and of itself is not immoral. It's how you treat them. That's when it becomes a problem. So if you mistreat them, if you abuse them, but it's perfectly moral, they say, to own someone as property. And I have been challenged recently. Dr. Josh, will you debate the morality of slavery with me? The answer will always be no, just so it's clear.
No.
The answer will
No.
always be no.
Yeah. There's nothing to
in
debate.
the same,
There's nothing
exactly.
to debate.
I'm not an ethicist, right? If I were a philosophical, person that worked in ethics, then fine. Maybe I'd have like a closed door session with you that's not, broadly, put out to the public or something, and we can discuss like why it is at this, deeper level or whatever, why something like rape or murder or slavery would be considered immoral. But I am ill-equipped to have that conversation, and there's just no way. It's the same way that there's no way I'm going to entertain a debate about whether trans people should have rights, right? Like, it's just not something I'm going to debate. It is a given they should, right? Like, done. That's where I begin. That's my axiom, I guess might be the right way to say that. And I will lose no sleep at night saying that I start with owning another person as property is immoral, or that rape is immoral, or murder is immoral, right? I will never lose a bit of sleep on that. Is that the most satisfying answer to everyone? Maybe not. I don't give a fuck. Sorry. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but here we are.
I typically don't get into.
Go on.
Well, I guess I was kind of responding to the initial question or whatnot. I normally don't get into discussions around here, but I think that's just pretty much because I work from home, and at my work we typically don't talk about this kind of stuff. But I have had some discussions with some people kind of close to me, like locally, and they pretty much just shake their head and is like, yeah, it's difficult passages. they don't really have a good response about those things. But as far as just in general, I've heard, every excuse, I guess, to get around it. And that would be, basically there was no chattel slavery, that slavery that existed in Israel wasn't as bad as it was in the South. So, there's that. There's also the route of, maybe slavery was okay. So, just in general, those are kind of the three things there, that I don't really get hit with as far as how Christians respond to these verses. Normally, I've been seeing a little bit more, and Josh will probably remember this, is Paul Copan's defense of slavery. And that's basically, I believe what his point was that they were not like slaves. They were employed. I've heard them characterized as like employees or indentured servants or something like that. And so there was no actual call to take slaves. And he does that from a very technical sort of aspect in the Old Testament. But I feel like that even fails. Josh and I did a whole stream on Paul Copan's sort of position on it and show how his explanation just simply doesn't explain the data that we have. And the data that we have definitely points to, slavery was a thing commanded by God.
Yeah, for sure. I had a conversation with an uncle of mine a couple of years ago, where he started saying sort of vaguely similar things of, a lot of the slave owners in the South, they actually treated the slaves like they treated them pretty. I don't know why I'm suddenly going into like a Kent Hovind impression here. That's not my job. That's your job, Josh. Sorry.
Dogs never produce non-dogs.
They were doing that whole thing. Yeah, right. No, of course not. No. And I told him, I was like, listen. They were holding these people as property, and they weren't allowed to leave, and they weren't paying them, and they weren't doing all of these things. If they aren't doing that, how can you say that they were treating them well? The only way that you can treat an individual like that well is by freeing them. That's all. And he looked at me, and he was like, yeah, no, I actually had never thought of it that way. And I'm like, I didn't respond because take the victory where I can and then retreat, I guess, because I didn't know what to do else. But I'm like, what do you mean you didn't think of that? Yeah, it's horrifying.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Are you? Is there any sort of movement in the United States to like actually enact any of this?
Enact what, slavery?
Well, no, I mean, not necessarily like that directly, but I guess, I mean, I don't want to come across as so ignorant that there are racist people in the U.S. That would be maddening, but like formal, like I guess the way it would look would be a return to legally sanctioned segregation and stuff like that. Are there movements? Are there movements with legs in this country, and where are they? And what do you have to do to stop them?
Well, I guess I don't know their exact agenda, but I mean, there's Nazis all over Florida right now. Parading through there. I mean, there's Nazis all over the United States. The Christo-fascist white nationalism is pretty prevalent in America and the socio-political scene. So I feel like a lot of them are being a little. They're probably downplaying a little bit. The more of the like segregation or racial stuff a little bit. They're mostly focused on, establishing some kind of fascistic like power in the United States. And, in Florida, they got Ron DeSantis, who is apparently their boy for that. And, then there's, the rest of the MAGA group that's out there and they definitely want to replace, they want to replace our current government with a more Christo-fascist sort of government, much like Gilead in The Handmaid's Tale. And I feel like
that was exactly the analogy I was thinking of.
Yeah, and I feel like there is a movement of people that are definitely Christo-fascist. I don't know if they have slavery necessarily in their mind, but I can guarantee you that the same people that are out there being like, if God says to enslave people, then I guess that's fine. Or if God says to like kill small children, I guess that's fine. Those people are most likely going to populate those types of groups that are like hardcore, like Christian inerrantists. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of them harbored those kinds of things. But then again, I don't mean to speculate about how people are thinking or feeling or anything like that. But given the proclivity of inerrantists to be like, slavery's all right, I would think that they would probably not have a problem with it.
Yeah.
It's very fucking scary is my point.
Yeah.
No, thank you for calling in.
Yeah.
Thank you for calling in, Dr. Tap/Vandy.
I'm in chat as Tapioca Weasel, Dr. Tapioca Weasel. So, anyway,
you are. Who you are now.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I hope you have an awesome night, and I guess we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, great to talk to you. Great to talk to you again, John. I called you a couple of years ago, and I think this is the first time talking to you, Dr. Josh. So good to see you again.
Awesome. Take care.
All right.
Awesome.
Bye.
See you later. All right. Well, that seems to be all the calls. So we really appreciate everybody joining in tonight. We're about to go into the super chats. I don't think that we had too many of them, but really do appreciate anybody that wants to send in a super chat and interact with us in that kind of fashion. Y'all would be, awesome to help support stuff here. Otherwise, tell the channel to kick. That's what we're saying tonight. All right, Josh, you want to do this first one?
Yeah. So $20 from Raven 200. Dr. Josh, can you use your Kent Hoviant voice to say that I'm a loser who likes whale peen? Yeah. So here's a problem with this sort of thing because we have to be a little more specific, okay, about what kind of whale penis we're talking about here. Because, of course, as that pervert, he knows it's a 14-foot whale penis, okay? And so ultimately, I'm a loser who likes whale penis, okay? I'm here to help.
There you go. You gotta, did you question whether or not they were a pervert? Are you a pervert or something? I'm not the one that brought up penis, Kent. Anyways, More Than a Flame for $20 says, GE, we spoke a few times and I was under a delusion. Been deconstructing for about 2 years now. Thank you so much for the work all of you do. Thank you, More Than a Flame. I remember talking to you, and it was a bit of a wild discussion. So whatever you're doing now, I guess good on you. If you're deconstructing and stuff, that's awesome. All right, you want to take this one, Josh?
Sure. $5 from Emery King. Thanks for taking my call. I wish it was easier to talk objectively about these subjects with people, but skepticism is a learned skill and not common enough. Agreed. I appreciate you calling. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Emery. All right, next is 10 from PhD Tony. Says, thank you for the work you both do, pushing back against the frontiers of ignorance and intolerance. Awesome. I'm so relieved that somebody sees me as doing that.
$5 from Sherry. Elephant in the room. Why do you both have the same art in your rooms? Also, what is it? Well, we are both part of the Illuminati, right? So
okay, so
go ahead, John. I've given the real answer, but you give the cover answer. Go ahead.
Here's the cover. Okay, so basically, what happened was Josh and Megan had seen that on their wall, and I think that y'all were raffling off a copy of it or something. Like y'all just had a copy of it, and so y'all were raffling it off. And we bought raffle tickets and everything. I wasn't expecting to win. I wasn't necessarily wanting to win, but I'm like, I want a Marduk picture. And so I got one, and I just, when we moved into this house, I just put it up on the wall. I just genuinely like, the artwork. And I also got, this is, I can't remember the name of this mask.
Huwawa or Humbaba.
Well, yeah. Humbaba. That's right. Is a fun name. Megan made it. And we got it from her Etsy store. I can't figure my fingers out. But yeah, no, I saw basically I saw Josh's painting, was like, I want that one. And so I took it. Well, I bought a version of it.
And this was painted for us. It's amazing. So we were like, oh my gosh, well, we're putting it in the background. It's going to be there on every stream. So.
All right. From the Raven 205. We all know about Karl Marx, but people don't seem to know about his sister. She invented the starter pistol, Anya Marx. Okay.
On your marks, get set.
Oh, I got you. On your marks. I got it. I was slow to it. It's a slow
I feel
night
like
for
I
me.
just made up for something because I didn't know what FOMO meant. Somebody said FOMO. I was like, and then somebody said he wants to date a trad girl. And I was like, I don't know what a trad girl is. And so people called me a boomer. So I feel like I just made up for it, except now that I'm thinking about it, that's a dad joke. So it actually makes me a boomer. I'm going to be quiet now. $5. Oh, sorry. From Supreme Scientist, Dr. Josh, can you comment on how some Bible translation committees are reluctant to translate evet or doulos as slave and instead use the term servant? Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, so everybody understands, translations, terms, anything that comes from a foreign language into a receptor language has to be interpreted, right? You have to. Translation is it's almost never like a one-to-one correspondence between languages, right? So you always have to pick the closest term that we have that would sort of represent the idea that's coming out of the other language, and then secondly, it's always context driven, right? Meaning is contextually derived. So when we think about these words, like the Hebrew word eved is it's used in a wide variety of contexts. And that's not just true of the Hebrew word. It's of the wider Semitic word like wardu, or the Sumerian term like arad or three. These are all words that carry some form of someone being very broadly subservient to someone else, right? But that word eved can be used to describe like a slave proper, right? It can be describing a chattel slave. It can describe a debt slave. It can also be used to describe like a petty king who is under is a vassal to, a suzerain king. It can be used to describe, like Moses as the servant of Yahweh. Like, in other words, there's a wide variety of ways that this term can be translated. And so when we in English hear the word slave, it brings up certain images, right? And because it's very complicated, right? Because when we think of slave, we think of like maybe the movie Roots, for example, or things that we read in high school. It brings up those images, right? And if translators or translation committees in certain passages want to distance themselves from that concept, what they will do is they will often wrestle with this and say, well, maybe servant is a better translation. And in some cases, I think that's fine, right? But the problem is that when you do that, you have to be very, very careful because you can go quite far the other direction and have it lose its meaning, right? So if somebody says like servant, well, then, now we're talking about like, I don't know, somebody sort of like works around the house, right? And then, can go home at night or something like it. In other words, the pendulum swings too far the other direction. So I think what's necessary, and I'll land with this, sorry. What's necessary in these types of discussions is to say, yes, look, the term that we're using to translate this is slave. Here's why. Or in this particular context, we're using servant. Here's why. And talk about the passage, talk about the characteristics. But yeah, that's sort of the translation conundrum.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add to it. That was all you. This is $4.99 from Claire. who's asking, I'm arguing with my parents again. What would y'all say to someone who doesn't believe grape culture is real? Great. Yeah. What? I mean, it'd be a little hard, I guess, to talk to somebody about that. I know personally what I tend to do if I've ever in a disagreement with somebody over something that is very obvious to me is I bring up like a hard objective data, like, you know, comparing and contrasting how like certain people are given leeway in court, you know, as far as grape accusations or grape charges, those kinds of things. Like bringing up the data on that, I feel if that doesn't sway somebody to show a pervasive problem, I feel like I feel like at that point nothing is going to get through to them about it, and it's just I don't know if something else will, but for me it's always the hard data, like showing the prevalence of this in society. It's really hard to reach somebody that's willing to ignore the hard evidence on it. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've got a shirt that I love wearing. It just says "Listen to Women" on it, because I think it's something that is like it could solve so many problems in society today, and nobody does it. And so I think often in this type of a conversation, for somebody like if Claire is saying, "Hey, like this is a thing," if they're not listening to a woman's perspective on this, that's obviously very, very problematic. But I think more broadly, like when I talk about this, and again, it's not my area of expertise at all, but I like to bring up, and I is a school down in Texas, I think, and I can't remember the specifics now, but like it was an elementary school as I remember it, but like stenciled on the wall in the hallways, like intentionally put there, it said something like, "Act like a lady and he'll treat you like one." And I think back to like when my daughter, who is now 16, I think was in like the 7th grade, 6th grade, was pulled when she got off the school bus. She was pulled to the side in front of all the people that were going into the school and was talked to, I think, by the vice principal, sort of loudly about like the spaghetti straps that she was wearing, right? And how, you know, she needs to be modest and she needs to, you know, cover herself and all these things. And I mean, I think, again, not my area of expertise. These are just the things that come to mind. But I mean, it's in that scenario, who was responsible for the man's behavior? A woman, every time, right? And so it's just it, and I'll say this and I'll land. We used to live in downtown Baltimore City, and you know, one of the things that you always become very, very attuned to is, did I lock my car? You know, did I lock up my bike, or did somebody lock up my bike or something? And it got to the point that it sort of felt like if I forgot to lock something, I deserve to have it stolen, right? And I think that this is the sort of mindset that we set women up for in these contexts, where it's like, well, what was I, as everybody's stereotypically, what was I wearing? How did I act? Did I say something suggestive? You know, I think it's just very difficult. John, yours is obviously the much better answer, because I'm sure that it goes to the data, but I mean, like, and I don't have that data. It's not my area of expertise, but like, these are things that sort of stand out to me that I say, why are these things this way? Why do we have this mindset where we make women responsible for the way that men treat them? It's just, yeah, it's the culture.
Yeah. And I do want to clarify something about my point. And that's, it can't, like, I don't want people to think that, only like statistical information you can get from like, the government or something like that is what I was talking about. I mean, instances like what Josh was talking about, the instances in school, because like, especially for some reason, I don't know why, but for some reason in these Christian universities, there are just so many horror stories that you can pull out of how administrators, they seem to want to blame the victim and do all this victim blaming stuff. There's several different reports on it. You've also got like the I believe the Southern Baptist Coalition just recently had a massive report about the prevalence of sexual assault in Southern Baptist communities. So, I mean, like there's several different areas in which you can pull data from to show the prevalence. And it's like, well, one or two instances doesn't prove a trend. While true, you can like pull like massive amounts of these, incidents, and you can show a trend through the massive amount of information that you have. So that's, I just wanted to clarify that.
$4.99 from Claire. I know Jimmy says all the time that we shouldn't argue with people, but I always seem to find myself doing it again. Claire, you are not alone.
I love arguing with people. Like, I don't know why you wouldn't want to argue with somebody. But I mean, then again, I spent so much of my life not wanting to argue with people that now I'm just kind of like, I'll fucking argue with you. Let's go kind of attitude about me. So. All right. And then we've got Emery King for 5 again saying, glad the line finally fired Jimmy. I bet the surgery is just a cover. Thank God that guy is gone. He sucks. Go Jimmy yourself. I'm sure Jimmy is just rolling over wherever he's at right now. Well, I do believe that's going to be it from the line tonight. Josh, thank you so much for joining tonight and providing some really great answers. I mean, you really saved my voice a little bit tonight. I don't know if people can tell.
That was my goal. That was my goal.
Yeah. But that's going to be it for us tonight. Later on this week, we've got a lot of shows that are coming up that are great. If you want to, you can join the Patreon by going to patreon.com/call the line. And you can support us there. Looks like we had one last super chat come in right at the very end. So what did I learn tonight? Secret ancient number codes plus allegory of the cave means that black holes are qubits, which are rock bands. I mean, that's what I learned. I don't know about you, Josh, but I mean, that's exactly, I was taking notes somewhere about that. Anyways, thank you guys for joining us tonight, and I guess we will see you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up, use your voice, and all that kind of good shit. Bye, heathens. Oh yeah, we're on the screen for this. So join the Patreon. Patreon.com/call the line.